Oh, yeah.
You were like, get out of my way, Laura.
It's all good.
Hi. Kelly, can you hit the lights, please? Good afternoon, everybody. We're going to start the workshop in just a moment. If you could please find your seats. All right. Good afternoon. My name is Laura Dodd. I'm the Principal Transportation Planner for the City of Cape Coral. I would like to welcome everybody online and also here with us in person for attending the city's very first Multimodal Transportation Plan public workshop. So a little bit of background. The Multimodal Transportation Plan is identified in the city's 2030 Strategic Compass. This is identified as a key initiative to reduce congestion, connect neighborhoods, and improve safety and quality of life for all residents. So to meet that objective, the city sought the consulting expertise of Volkart, including Ned Beyer and his excellent team, to assist us in drafting the Multimodal Transportation Master Plan. The plan kicked off in March and is anticipated to run 1 year and conclude in March of 2024, pardon me. The importance of your participation and efforts here should not be understated, and all of the input we receive from the public will be anticipated to be rolled into the final recommendations for the plan. So that being said, thank you so much for attending again, and I'd like to introduce Ned Beyer to provide the presentation.
Okay. Thank you, Laura. Yeah, so my name is Ned Beyer. I work for Volkart Incorporated, and I'm the project manager, and I'm here with our team tonight. Thank you for those in the audience here. And then I understand people are online watching this presentation. We're finally here, right? Cape Coral's gone through a lot this last year with the hurricane, and it delayed our start, but we caught up quickly. Hats off to the city and all the residents really coming back so quickly with the cleanup and restoration of the community. As Laura said, this multimodal transportation plan is an assessment of the current transportation system, but then looking forward, really focusing on non-roadway improvements, biking, walking, transit, micromobility, trails, things that may be new to Cape Coral. But let me get into the presentation here. This is our agenda. I'm going to introduce our team. Some of you have already met some of our team members, describe the scope and the schedule. We're going to focus on the people that have been doing the work are actually going to be making the presentation. So Chris Zupa will be presenting existing conditions. We'll have the team of Kelly Farabee and Angela Rayo with SM&E. They're on our consultant team. We'll be presenting the scenario development. I'll be presenting the bicycle pedestrian plan update, and then the micromobility, and then public involvement in your questions. And let me repeat really that the most important thing tonight is really hearing from you. You know, your opinions matter. We have display boards with, some of these are slides, some of it is new, fresh information. We've printed maps that we have comment cards. So this is your opportunity to provide us input. We really value your input, and we will have a lot more participation in different forms during the course of this study. These are the people here today with me, my team members. They're around, and they'll be making, as I mentioned, parts of this presentation. This is really difficult to read on the slide, right? It's not just my eyes, but I think the major takeaway here is Cape Coral, with over a 200,000 population, is a really significant city in the state of Florida. And as a pre-platted community, it really was built for the automobile, right? It was a different time, a different age. It was about moving traffic, moving cars faster. Biking and walking have become much more important as the need for safety has increased. And so our focus again is on non-motorized transportation. You think of biking and walking in trails, think of taking the bus or public transportation. There's something called micromobility. Basically, that's the electric scooters. It can be golf carts. It can be kind of some of the new bike rental, electric bikes, things that have really come to the forefront over the last decade or so in communities nationwide. We are also, the city has asked us to look at a transit demonstration project in our work, working with Lee-Tran. And there's been some examples in Lee County, in Lehigh Acres and Bonita Springs that seem to have some practicality here in the community. So talk about a couple things here. You know, the takeaway is, you know, Cape Coral is a large community, 200,000 plus people. I believe your build out in 20 years is projected over 260,000 people. And let's be real here. I mean, most of the projections so far for Lee County have been on the low side. If you've lived any time in Southwest Florida or Lee County, you understand the population growth has been just consistent, ongoing, and with that brings traffic and congestion on the roadways. We're also looking at we are looking at least one roadway project. This would be a brand new interchange, the extension of Del Prado over to Interstate 75. There's some benefits both for regional travel and then also for hurricane evacuation. One of the partners here, who's here in the audience today, the Lee County MPO and Executive Director Don Scott, they have a hurricane evacuation study underway right now. Also, you know, looking at that issue and some of the other hurricane route issues. You know, unique to Cape Coral is that 36% of the community is a canal system or is water and canals. And because of that, the connectivity is not always what it should be. We'll talk more about that later. And then the city has made great strides in building sidewalks, say over the last decade. However, most of the sidewalks are located near schools, which should be the priority, but still there's a lot of sidewalk needs in the community. And then finally, just funding. You know, the one thing I'll mention about this plan, it's a visionary plan, but it's also going to speak towards we want this implemented, right? So we want it funded in the city's capital improvement program. We are going to identify projects that we can apply for state and federal grants. There's a lot of opportunities out there right now. And so it's really the city, I think, is putting its best foot forward in advancing this plan. So these were the 5 major task items. Scenario development, we're going to talk more about that. Existing conditions, we're going to talk more about that. Needs analysis and opportunity. Like a lot of planning studies, you identify projects in a map. And you know, at the end of the day, we're going to come back with lines on the map, specific projects, with cost estimates, with a time frame. But that's still, you know, a ways off, but that's where we're headed. And then, of course, the plan documentation. We cannot read this slide, right? This is like hard on the eyes. But as Laura said, this is about a year-long effort. We started in March. We hope to be completed next March with City Council adoption of the plan. And we fully expect some follow-up tasks to be implemented. identifications of projects for some grants, and then some other implementation activities. And there will be another public workshop as well. I believe it's scheduled now in January, but more about that later. So just very quickly, some demographics. You know, the city has a population now of over 200,000 people, which, you know, that's a big number. I'm from the Midwest, and in the Midwest, that's a good-sized community. The median age, 48.3 years, that's higher than the national average, but looking at the demographics in the community, there's a pretty sizable population of younger families and kids here. You can tell with the number of schools here, but you do have a sizable population, 65 and older, nearly a quarter. And then the minority population too is over 30% here. And we are going to make some special efforts to identify projects in those areas of need. So another just takeaway here, I thought this was really interesting. The average commute time to work, 28.4 minutes, that's to and from work. That's pretty high. That shows that a lot of people are leaving Cape Coral to go to their jobs either in Fort Myers or Charlotte County or other places in the region. That's a pretty high number. So, you know, part of our work and part of the city's, I think, long-term goal really addresses land use and some context, you know, making sure that the transportation improvements help implement some land use changes, which could in fact mean more density, redevelopment on certain corridors. The other takeaway here, you can see driving alone is about 80% of the current how workers commute. And you can see walking, biking is extremely low, transit is low, and there's been some changes obviously with the pandemic. More people are working at home now, so there are some opportunities to maybe build on that. Finally, you know, we're not working in a vacuum. We understand that in the last, say, 10 years, there's been a lot of different plans and studies that the city, other stakeholders like the Lee County MPO, Lee-Tran, other nearby Lee County, for example, Department of Transportation. A lot of things have been done in the past at our various points of implementation. There's a couple of things that stand out here I wanted to mention. One is a project by the Department of Transportation, State Road 78 Corridor Vision Study. In fact, there is a meeting tomorrow night. Part of our team is working on that project for the Department of Transportation. What time is that meeting? It's
5
o'clock. 5 o'clock. It's located at
Cape Coral Technical College.
Cape Coral Technical College, 5 p.m. tomorrow night. State Road 78, the Department of Transportation is leading that effort. I had mentioned previously the Cape Coral Evacuation Study. That's being completed by the Metropolitan Planning Organization. And I just backed up the slide. The other one I'll mention here too is Lee-Tran, the Transit Development Plan. You know, we're going to be closely working with Lee-Tran and trying to identify a transit demonstration project that can be implemented here in the community. In our documentation and report, we have reviewed these documents. We've, the takeaways, the major takeaways, and how they would impact our planning. I'll mention too, and Laura, I believe, is the project manager for a parking, Laura, it's a parking inventory. I believe it's for South Cape Management Plan for Cape Coral. And that has just started. That's going to be important for the community. And there's also a build-out interactive study now, interactive growth model, I believe, that's just been initiated by the city, but that's to determine the future population growth in the community. So with that, I'm going to turn this part of the presentation over to Chris Supa from our team. He's going to talk about existing conditions. Chris.
Hi, thanks, Ned. So I'm just going to run through the existing conditions assessment, what we're doing and what we've done up to this point. We're about 80% through with the assessment. For those of you who are not familiar with what an existing conditions assessment is, it's pretty much just looking at what facilities there are in Cape Coral. It includes a crash analysis, taking an inventory of bicycle pedestrian facilities like sidewalks, trails, bike lanes. Also identifying environmental justice areas and doing an equity analysis using the current standards set by EJ40 with federal standards. Also looking at where jobs are and where they will be, what's the current land use policy and what will the future land use policy be, population, and then what do your roads look like? What's the traffic on the roads? How are the roads classified? Where are the evacuation routes? And then lastly, looking at transit. So the next 3 slides will be showing you what the trends look like for safety, specifically for vulnerable users. Vulnerable users are your bicycle pedestrians and also motorcyclists and mopedists. From a higher level, when we dug into the number of crashes, bad news is Cape Coral, the crashes have gone up between 2012 and 2022. In 2012, there were about 1,400 crashes total. That's including cars, bicyclists, pedestrians. 2022, around 6,400 crashes. So that's about a 335% increase. When zeroing in on vulnerable users, this is bicycle crashes, pedestrian crashes and fatalities, and motorcycle moped crashes, fatalities and injuries. You can see pretty much it hasn't improved here too much. It's been flat. So that's something that this plan will be looking at doing, is how can we improve safety for all users, for all people, regardless of age and ability. So that's the big takeaway. You could see with the maps, the hot spots for where the crashes are. It's all pretty much along the major corridors. Just one additional note with safety, in 2022, your 2 top emphasis areas were intersections and distracted driving. So it's kind of an interesting piece of information. We're also looking at transit routes, so you can see where transit service is in Cape Coral. It's limited to your main roads. There are 11 transit routes, 330 bus stops. There's, and here are the routes that are listed here, so limited transit service, fixed route, and then here are the case studies. We'll turn it back over to Ned.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. So one of the things we were asked to do by the city was to look elsewhere, like give us some examples, especially closer to home in Florida. What are other communities doing, especially in terms of multimodal transportation? So we selected a few. City of Port St. Lucie on the East Coast, and actually our project manager from the city happens to be from that community. They've done a lot of really great things. Number one, they've established a mobility fee to pay for things, and that's based on development and traffic impacts of a development. But they took a lot of time and effort to do that, and that's really important because mobility fees can be used to fund biking, walking, transit, things like that that we are really focusing on in this study. And by the way, the city of Port St. Lucie started with the same focus of doing a multimodal transportation plan. They also implemented a number of policy changes for the different city departments, everything from enforcement of traffic laws and speed reduction on roadways, as well as how they implement their capital improvement program priorities. So we did look at the city of Port St. Lucie. We looked right across the river to the city of Fort Myers. Fort Myers, geographically, you're very close, of course, the connectivity with the bridges. Fort Myers also has a very high crash rate. although it's been improving. And we're trying to understand why some of the trends in Fort Myers as far as crashes are, either plateauing or coming down a little bit. We think law enforcement, speed reduction probably are making a difference. If you know the city of Fort Myers, in their downtown area, they've focused in a lot on walking and biking. They have some other plans to kind of take that to the next level. And they're considering programs of rental bicycles and things like that. They also have connectivity of a biking and walking system, part of the Sun Trail statewide network, which actually is in Cape Coral as well. But I think the focus is on protected bike lanes and other walking trails. The city of Fort Myers also recently completed a bike ped master plan that it's been implementing. We also looked at the city of Pensacola and the Panhandle. And what was interesting about Pensacola, they've actually implemented as a demonstration project some pilot programs for micromobility. And we have some information about micromobility, and we can get into some of the details on that with the team after this presentation. But it is a community that they kind of took it to the next level as far as implementing via codes, via changes to their capital improvement program, and they've made a lot of progress in a very short time. We also looked at your neighbor to the south, to the north, Charlotte County. And I think about Charlotte County, one of the things they've done is they've done a really good job of leveraging state and federal grants, especially for their Riverwalk area in the city of Punta Gorda. They also have a countywide bike ped master plan that's been implemented by Charlotte County as well as the municipalities in the community. And they also have a micromobility program, but it's really focused on volunteers that are providing, say, bike rentals in the city, the historic area of Punta Gorda. So we looked at a couple of different communities. And now we're going to kind of change gears, and we're going to describe a methodology of how we're identifying projects for the plan. And with that, I'm going to introduce Angela.
Thank you, Ned. Appreciate it. Thank you. Well, and welcome tonight. Appreciate being here tonight. I'm just going to talk about a couple of things, and more importantly, I'm going to introduce Kelly Farabee. I'm Angela Rao with SNME, and I'm the Deputy Project Manager under Ned's leadership. Really proud to be on this team. I do want to talk about, obviously, scenario development, who Kelly will be talking about in a minute. But if I could just broach the subject of what I affectionately call SAM, or safety, accessibility, and mobility for all transportation users. I think this plan is really about that. And I think that's what makes this a very proud element of what we're trying to do for the citizens of Cape Coral. Safety, accessibility, and mobility for all transportation users. You heard Chris talk a little bit about vulnerable users, for example. We mean all transportation users, including, if I may add, elderly and children. I'm an elderly person, so that's the kind of thing that we're trying to do, is to make sure this is for all people of Cape Coral. So with that, I want to introduce Kelly Farabee. She's a brilliant traffic engineer, and she'll be talking about scenario planning and scenario development. Kelly?
Thank you, and thank you all for having us tonight. So scenario planning is kind of this special process of where we develop different ideas, or like kind of different what ifs, like what if this is what the future looks like, or kind of some different ideas for looking at how the policies and projects affect the future of the community. And essentially it's kind of a process that helps stakeholders and decision makers and the public select and prioritize the transportation projects to implement. At the end of this whole project, the goal is to have a list of projects that can be implemented to, to shape the future of the community. So we've come up with kind of three, what we call scenarios, and which is the Trending Tomorrow, Connected Community, and Safer City. So I'm going to go through each of those a little bit and just tell you kind of how we're going to look through each of these lenses, if you will, to kind of get an idea of what the future could look like. So for trending tomorrow, we'll be looking at current transportation trends and patterns and assuming those would continue into the future. So we'll be looking at a lot of different surveys and data and some of the historical data. And in doing so, we can develop patterns and we can look for those patterns. And obviously, like Ned mentioned, the population keeps growing and we expect it to continue growing. So that's one of those patterns and trends that we would look at. So as we look to identify projects, we might say, you know, how is this growing population going to affect the mobility of the community? And I've already heard a few of you are telling me about little hot spots in the community where you're already seeing challenges with congestion and traffic, and some of you already told me you have concerns that, well, how is this going to look if the population continues growing and we continue developing? So that's kind of the goal of this scenario, is to look at those trends. Ned showed us earlier that the 80% of the population commuters driving to work alone. So that's part of that is, okay, if we continue to grow and we continue to drive, what types of projects do we need to look at to address the concerns that are going to come along with all that growth and the typical trends we expect. So then we also have our connected community scenario. So this is connectivity is prioritized with a goal to encourage more active transportation. So in this scenario, we're envisioning, maybe we try to create a future where more people want to walk and bike. Maybe we change that mode share and get more active transportation users, and maybe help reduce some of the congestion on the roadways where if there's a few less cars, we can kind of create a balanced system. And this will look a lot at corridors in the community. We know Cape Coral is known for its beautiful canals, and that's been a great amenity that's attracted a lot of people and made it a great place to be and live and work. But we also know that kind of creates challenges from a transportation perspective, because we end up having roadways that get cut off by canals, and now trying to get cars and bikes and pedestrians becomes a challenge. So there's a lot of key corridors in the community that will need to be evaluated as part of this process. We'll be looking for gaps in the system and where those need to be filled in, and whether it's for cars or bikes or pedestrians, how can we create more connectivity? And then finally, that safer city scenario. So, as Chris touched on, there's been the crash history seems to kind of be a little bit stagnant, and so we want to look at what if safety improvements are prioritized to address existing safety concerns. And Chris already noted that as well, that intersection crashes were a high volume of the crashes that we've seen historically. So this scenario will probably spend some time looking at intersections as well as those corridors where we've seen a lot of crashes. And there's a lot of different programs and tools that we can use to address the safety concerns. So we'll be looking, through that Target Zero, that's the Florida Department of Transportation's Vision Zero program of envisioning zero fatalities and incapacitating crashes. So how can we get there? And how can we use, Step Up is a program that looks at pedestrian safety. And then we also have the Safe Systems approach, which is a nationally recognized program that looks at, it's not just about making safer roads or trying to have safer road users. It's also safer speeds, or even that post-crash care and safer vehicles. It's a whole system, and we can't just look at one component. So we'll be looking at, a lot of those different existing elements in the system and how they relate to the crashes. So I think that's fact.
Yeah, thank you. So, keep in mind, everything that we're doing so far with this analysis, we're building towards the plan, and then we're going to come up with a list of projects and a map. So you're going to kind of keep telling yourself that, because this is a lot of information that we're throwing to you right now. And again, this is the first ever multimodal transportation plan for the city. And there's some real advantages for the city to do this and not rely upon other agencies that may be focused on like regional traffic or other issues. So just kind of keep that in mind as we go through this presentation. So switching gears again, but we're also updating the bicycle and pedestrian master plan. Hats off to the city of, doing the plan so many years ago. It was in 2016. And it was adopted by the city council, and it did focus on projects both short-term and long-term. It had some policies, and it looked into some design features for biking and walking improvements. So just very quickly, I want to just address, here's some, on the left side, you'll see some of the goals from the 2016 master plan, and I was part of that team that put that together. One was reduce the number of bicycles and pedestrian crashes by half within 5 years. Well, that hasn't happened, right? So a lot of good things happened with the plan, but that has not happened. And then it specifically mentioned different pedestrian crashes on really the hot spots where you think of Cape Coral. Where are these crashes occurring? No surprises here. Del Prado, Cape Coral Parkway, Santa Barbara Boulevard, Pine Island Road. Well, we're still working on that, and the city's still working on that, despite improvements. We also had to achieve the silver or gold bicycle-friendly community designation by the League of American Bicyclists. That's a goal. The city is currently at a bronze designation, which is good, but we can even do better. The city can do better. And I believe in 2019, the city did resubmit to see if we could go to the next level, and not yet. There's some things that the city still needs to do. So we hope with this bike ped master plan update, we can get there. But you can see some of the goals, and then you can see some of the successes, or some of the goals. Create a 228-mile walkway network. That's sidewalks, basically, within 5 years. And you can see create a 202-mile on-street bikeway network within 20 years. Create 31-mile multi-use path network within 20 years. The good news is, here we go. Here's the good news. Here's the progress made since 2016. And you can see 51 miles of sidewalks were added to the city inventory. That's great. And most of that money came from the city's capital improvement program and making a real effort, and then also working with the Metropolitan Planning Organization on some state grants. 5 miles of bike lanes were added. Okay, the city has about 72 miles of bike lanes now in the community. 11 miles of shared use paths were added for a total of 20 miles. So some really good progress made for off-street bike ped trails. So you can see the difference when these plans are adopted. It really does make a difference. We did some analysis. We think about 50% of that plan actually has been implemented over time, which is, that's pretty darn good, and given 2016, what's that, 8 years, and given a hurricane and other, economic things, so that's really pretty high. But so of the current plan update, we're basically going to be looking at the list of projects, the costs. We know that inflation has increased the cost, so we're going to redo the costs. We're going to go through the project list, which projects have been implemented, which projects need to be added. And I think we're going to focus more on safety this time, because I think as Chris Zupa presented in the crash analysis, you can see safety is even more of a concern now than it was when the plan was adopted. And I'll mention too, just countermeasures. And we've, one thing about the team here that we put together, we have some real experts here, Angelo Rayo, Rao, with his complete streets knowledge, and others on the team. We know what countermeasures that really work in making biking and walking safer. Chris Soup is going to talk about micromobility really quick, and then we're going to kind of get to your questions. Chris, did you just want to talk a few minutes on this?
Yeah, real quickly. So one last thing that the plan will address, it's something probably new to many of you, is micromobility. Micromobility is basically small, lightweight transportation. It's good for traveling, up to 3 miles is the average distance. And there are about 266 micromobility projects across the nation as of a few years ago. But micromobility, if you've been to St. Petersburg, Florida, Tampa, or Austin, Texas, it's e-scooters, it's bike sharing. Those are the types of programs that are generally considered micromobility, although it could be other modes. So what will this plan do? It's a first step towards implementing micromobility in Cape Coral. Ideally, this plan will identify policies that will be necessary for implementing it, and as well as identifying corridors where it would be appropriate for implementing micromobility. So those are two of the main goals of this plan. So it's a first step there. And then, do you want me to talk about this?
Yeah.
So this is basically just talking about micromobility a little bit more and about what we'll be doing to identify those corridors. And I had mentioned it's sort of that first and last mile. Generally, it's a distance that you probably don't want to walk, so it'd be nice to bike or scooter there. And I also mentioned the policy and best practices recommendations. We also did a case study, our partner Alta did a case study that looked at a pilot program in Pensacola and what they did for that program, which was they developed a franchise area and the policies that they needed to actually implement micromobility. With that pilot program, they used 2 scooter companies and 2 type of e-scooters. One was a stand-up, another was a seated scooter. And then they would, additional piece of information there is one of the policies that they implemented, the city did, was scooters were not allowed on the sidewalks. There are specific roads that scooters could share the road with. The only time scooters were allowed on the sidewalks was for parking the scooters at stations. And ultimately, they landed on one, after the pilot program, they permanently adopted the program, and they are going with seated scooters, so as a part of it. But yeah, that's basically it for micromobility.
Thanks, Chris. So we're going to wrap up our presentation. We really want to hear from you, and so we'll be at the boards, we'll be at the maps. We really want to hear your comments. You can write things down. We brought a lot of information, so please use it, read it. So upcoming public involvement, we're going to have another meeting like this. It's in January. We'll keep you informed about that. But let me mention to you, Laura, hats off to the city. They've had a real, a high number of meetings within the city department staff to hear about this plan and provide input. So, we've had Laura, probably 3 or 4 meetings here. I think we've had, and I talk to Laura about every other day, it seems, about something. But we're getting really good participation from the city staff. We have a website that we will be building. It's live. We've had information on there. We'll keep adding information. We're going to have a public survey that'll be launched here later in a couple of months. And then we have something called Wikimaps, which I think that's part of the public survey, that it's an online engagement tool that you can be adding information to. So again, it's a real honor for me and my team to be working on this plan. So, thank you. Thank you for being here, those who ventured out in the heat and the storm. And we know we have a huge online audience right now that's watching, so we think. So with that, I'll take questions, and Chris, we've got a microphone. We're pretty informal, right? There's not like hundreds of people here, so. So we'll take your questions, we can break and go to the maps, whatever you want to do. So, are there any questions?
How bad is the bicycle and pedestrian crashes like per capita? How do we compare to other cities? Is it a huge problem or is it worse or?
Yeah.
How does Cape Coral compare to other cities as far as a per capita pedestrian and bicycle crashes? How big is the problem is it?
Yeah, Angela, do you want to start that response? Or
Well, I mean, statistically, I don't have the numbers in my mind, but I will say, I think Ned started the conversation, and we all admitted it. Cape Coral is a car-centric community, right? And you saw the data. The data was pretty clear that walking, biking, transit is extremely low in numbers. So with that, I'd have to say that we don't rank well with the use, shall we say. But your question is more on the actual safety part. So I don't have the data specifically.
Well, I can add to
answer
it, and
that?
then Chris, you probably have something to say, but I'm good. But, you know, one thing, there's something called dangerous by design. It's an evaluation. It's like a ranking of crashes across the United States and metropolitan areas. Lee County specifically has historically been in the top 10 for crashes. And the trend is, it maybe has plateaued because of Fort Myers, but you know, it's getting a little bit worse in Cape Coral, at least our initial results. So it's not good. It's not, it's on the poor side. Yeah.
Chris, did
The
you-
whole state of Florida, that's a good comment. I think just the way Florida's been developed, there's a lot of suburban style development with major highways and higher speeds, right? So, Chris, do you have anything else, sir? Yes, sir.
let me bring the mic, sir, if you don't mind.
I'm thinking that's what's really important is that Del Prado expansion to I-75, because of the fact that there's so many people that commute from Fort Myers, you know, or I'm sorry, from Cape Coral to Fort Myers every day. And with the mobility program that you got coming up, which is good, we need to have more businesses come into Cape Coral, especially in the downtown area, because this is where a lot of that mobility, I think, would come and play. I know they're working on downtown, the stores and the restaurants and
right.
things. And if they build the apartments around there, the mobility program would really help. But we need to generate, I think, more of that for the city of Cape Coral in that area. And hopefully that would, you know, spur that program and really make it take off.
Yeah, that's a really good comment. And I would just say that, you know, these transportation improvements can't be implemented in a vacuum if there's not some land use changes. And I think the city is working towards greater redevelopment, and they definitely want the downtown area of Cape Coral continue to be redeveloped and more walkable. And that's
Exactly, yes.
definitely, that's one of our focus areas that we will be looking specifically at, you know, walking and biking improvements, for example, micromobility opportunities there. So we're well aware of that. And then the Del Prado interchange, that's a regional project, you know, because it's a new interchange on the interstate. The Department of Transportation would be involved with that. But that's why, you know, the Lee County MPO has been supportive of that. Don Scott is here. Donna, if you have anything to add on Del Prado interchange. I know it's been on your radar screen for a while.
Because it would generate more businesses at Cape Coral for easy access for truckers and everybody go out the interstate, because we're so much residential here, you
Right.
know. More businesses, the better, I would say. And that's what I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just for clarification, Mr. Scott from the MPO said it's on the needs plan.
Okay, great, thank you. Does anyone else have anything to say or any questions? Okay, that's okay too, but so we've got the display boards and we're going to stick around for another, another 30, 45 minutes or so. So be great to talk, and if you've got some ideas for projects or areas of the community that you think we should really focus in on, please let us know. And remember your comment sheets too, and get those in. Thanks, guys. Thank you. Laura, back to you.
All right, so thank you, everyone. We really appreciate everyone coming out tonight. Public participation is paramount in this project. For individuals online or in person, you can always reach out to me directly, Laura Dodd with the Transportation Division. We will also be tracking any comments online at the city's new multimodal website. So thank you so very much for your time. And with that, I hope you have a good evening.